Hello, and once again, good afternoon, and welcome to this podcast where I'll be speaking to Mr. Rapulane Mabelane, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Tebe Investment. My name is Aubrey Masango, and this is The Truth in Development, powered by Ndiso Consulting Group. I am especially privileged to have this conversation with Mr. Rapulane Mabelane because I think Tebe Investment is probably one of the few black-owned companies that are still loyal to the ideas of black economic empowerment. And much of the conversation that we're going to have today is really about business within the context of black economic empowerment. Not just here in South Africa, but the whole idea of affirmative action throughout the world and why that is important. So I hope that you join us in this conversation, and I'm hoping that you'll be edified by the conversation that we'll have today. Mr. Rapulane Mabelane, thank you very much, my brother, for agreeing to talk to me. I really, really appreciate this.
The pleasure is mine. Good afternoon to you and to our viewers out there. Really privileged to be able to have this conversation, and I look forward to engaging.
You and I have had conversations on other platforms about a number of things, and I'm hoping that some of those things will emerge in this conversation. But I do want to start off by first asking about the background of Tebe Investment, of which you are the Chief Investment Officer. Where did Tebe Investment come from? How did it start? And what were the principles that you believe are responsible for Tebe's relative success?
Sure. No, thanks. It's a very good question. So Tebe actually predates democracy as we know it today, and Tebe predates BEE in its legally defined form. But Tebe originated in the context of the democracy. So in the heydays, early days, 1990s, as we were discussing about what the new South Africa should look like, and there were lots of political conversations happening. I wasn't here at the time, but our chairman always reminds me of that. And the story, by the way, is captured in our book, which I will share with you at some point also, is that as the political conversations were happening, fortunately, others had the foresight to say, we can't just be talking political freedom. We need to, yes, indeed, the immediate need is political freedom. But political freedom without economic freedom is unsustainable. And especially given where we're coming from as a country, in particular black people, the exclusion, right, systematic exclusion that black people suffered. It was felt by our forebears that we need to look at also how do we get black people, Africans in particular, to play a meaningful in the economic development and changes in the country. And that's how Tebe started. So really Tebe always started as fundamental to its core was about transformation. The tagline today says building communities is what we are committed to. But actually, transformation, of course you build communities through transformation. Transformation and the need to play a meaningful role in the economic transformation of our society is what motivated the start of Tebe. At that time, the official shareholder, if you like, was a trust called the Batubatu Trust, whose trustees were our luminaries that we admire greatly, and we are very proud as Tebe to have been associated with those, Mr. Nelson Mandela himself, Tate Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Bears Naudia, Enos Mabuza. Those were the founding fathers of the Batubatu Trust. And the Batubatu Trust became the sole shareholder, gave birth to this company, with a very modest contribution by a benefactor of about 100,000 rands back then. Seemed like a lot of money back then. But 1 July 1992, Tebe officially opened its offices in downtown Johannesburg.
What was there already at that point, in 1992, an appreciation of the business opportunities that would arise as a result of the political change that was already in the air at the time. Look, we understand that only in 1994 did we have a change in government through the negotiated settlement of that moment. We know that only in 1996 did we have a proper constitution. Up until then, we had an interim constitution. But was there already at that time, 1992, an understanding that there would be economic opportunities that the Batu Trust perhaps already could envisage?
I think so. I think that realization was based, obviously, historically, globally. Any political change brings about also other opportunities, social, economic, and otherwise. But remember that in our case, South Africa, and not just talking about Tebe here, is that the struggle fundamentally was never just about political freedom itself. It was about the total emancipation, the total liberation of an African person, in particular black people at the time, right? So that was always the struggle. So Tebe did not emerge completely without a context. So I would imagine, and my understanding is, as those conversations were happening, as I say, fortunately, others even started saying, well, even before we go too far, because remember we're talking 1992, right? These were the days of CODESA. I can't remember whether it was CODESA 1 or 2, but during those conversations.
But the negotiation was taking place, that negotiated settlement was still being midwifed, as it were, during that time, yeah?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right? And of course, the formation of Tebe happened outside of those conversations. Our leaders were having conversations about how a new South Africa should come about, a democratic South Africa, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. But others were having then on the sidelines conversations about we also need to start getting to play a role, a meaningful role. Remember also here, I'm saying start, it's not because black people started getting in business in 1992. We know through the likes of Bunta Temaponya and so on, black people were already, even way before, playing a role. It's just that obviously conditions were very difficult for them. The system made it extremely difficult for them to thrive. But black people had always been in business. You talk all manner of sectors of the economy, farming, otherwise, black people were there, taxi, transport, all of those. But what obviously the opportunity of 1992 was presenting was, as then the constraints, at least the political and legal constraints, were going to be dismantled. Then the question was, how then do we position ourselves? But at the core of Tebe, the issue was also not just have a company that's going to be profitable, right, from a capitalist point of view, but how can a company grow and still have a social soul, still play a role in developing communities? The idea was, can you get a company which becomes so successful, you can use any measure of financial metrics, become successful, but uses that success not just for the sake of its directors and shareholders, but for the benefit of the broader community. That is what always drove Tebe. And you'll see that, for instance, I mean, we can get into this later on if you need. I always tell people whenever I engage on these matters that Tebe even developed its own codes before the new codes that we know as the DTIC codes on BE. Tebe had its own codes. As soon as Tebe developed, as soon as Tebe was birthed, it then became, how are we going to measure how we're doing? And again, our forebears had the wisdom to start saying, well, we've got to put something together that we can all put us and say, we started here, and how do we measure our impact? Because it was all about what impact are we going to have in our communities. But if you can't measure it, right, you will never know whether it's doable or not.
It's clear that there was the foresight to understand that we can't encumber the business of business with politics. But we can't ignore the political responsibility that a Tebe would have in the context of a country where black people specifically were actively excluded from the mainstream of the economy. So I get that. But I'm looking here for what is it that a Mabuza would have seen to be the business opportunity, given the resources of Batu. In other words, when I say resources, I'm talking about the heavyweights that it had. Was there a particular business focus? Or was it to say, guys, here we are, opportunities are coming up, let's go and get whatever comes.
Yeah, so what it meant was right from the outset, recognizing that of course you are born within a context. And Tabe's context is very clear. We make no bones about that. It is clear. It's born in the heydays of democracy. It's born in that era. And it's born of, for instance, those luminaries. But when it came to then running the business of Tabe, among others, was to say, we are going to be so businesslike. So the very first thing was to constitute a proper board of directors. So that governance, this entity, should not be run like a political branch meeting. It should be run like any other business, right? So a first thing that they did was to form a proper board of directors consisting of men and women who understand business, right? Understand governance. But of course, they do not exist outside the context of a broader South Africa. And that is why this whole quotation about Tebe is in the business of business. And whilst you are, of course, operating within a political system, because you do, right? But you are going to focus on what you do. As I say, with that underlying focus about, we are not just going to now be aiming for super profits. We are going to be saying we are going to be a business, we're going to grow sustainably, we're going to use our success in business to achievement and advancement of transformation and building communities.
I want to park the asset that you had in those early days, and fundamentally it was the heavyweights, the luminaries. Anybody in any commercial space would have wanted to be associated with a Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, not Bram Fischer, Beyers Naudé. Those people were people that were magnetic. They were charismatic. They held a particular philosophy that everybody wanted to be associated with, and that's good for business, I would imagine. What was the first sort of investment that Tebe got into? And I'm interested also in hearing about how you started to sculpture a framework that said we must be accountable from a black empowerment point of view.
Yeah. In fact, one of the first success stories of Tebe, so having identified a need to play a role in the economy, was that we are ourselves also going to build our own businesses, right? And so Tebe, for instance, started SA Express. Right early days, the airline, the regional airline.
Wow.
Yes. Story gets forgotten sometimes because once it was sold, it operated for quite a while, but then, the rest is history. We know now SA Express, I think it's either no longer there or struggling. But SA Express was started by Tebe right in those very, very early days by Mr. Mabuza and his team of managers, for instance. Developing it from scratch, of course, with some funding. You never start business without funding. And yes, you are right. I mean, there's political capital. So the fact that the founding fathers of the trust were those luminaries, of course, provided political capital. There's no doubt about that. Let's not beat around the bush there. It did provide political capital. But you could not then come in and simply say, because I have this as my founding fathers and trustees, I'm going to rest on those laurels. No. We still had to work hard to prove that you are indeed capable of running a business. And when then our forefathers went to meet with business partners, you had to show a proper value proposition. Of course, transformation, of course. And those days, again, business people, you remember that even the political breakthrough came about partly because already in the late mid-80s or so, there were business people in South Africa, both in and outside, that started reaching out to the warring parties.
In fact, a lot of people attribute the success of what we will call the 1994 settlement to the background conversations that were taking place by fundamentally business people.
Led by business people.
Right.
Some of them, as I understand it, left because obviously the ANC and other political parties were banned in the country. They had to go and meet them outside the country. But they did. And they reached out to both the ruling party at the time, National Party, and of course the political parties. So I have no doubt that that political capital that was coming through the founding fathers of Tebe, at least from the point of view of already the business actors, would have also assisted in some of the engagement at that. But as I say, you could not simply just rest on those laurels. You still had to show that you are indeed a serious business person. And I think that's what happened.
SA Express started at that
SA
time?
Express was one of them. There were many. I mean, Tebe got into gambling, for instance, the casinos, got into tourism, got into health, got into financial services. One of the other things that Tebe did was also, for instance, right, again in the early days, was the formation of a bank. Of course, through other challenges, that bank later got liquidated. FBC, Fidelity Bank, was again one of those. Again, you would see here what trend is developing is identifying those sectors where already, in fact, also black people were playing a role. I mean, if you just think about in townships where we stay, in our villages, stock fairs, and so on and so on. So having a bank that could talk to those kind of communities, those kind of investors, made sense, right? Health made sense to be in health because what you then had, even then, was just the beginning of medical aid, right? And Tebe started very early on its own medical aid scheme, which actually it offered to mining. Initially, the workers that were there were in the mining space. We had a medical aid scheme, we had a medical administrator of our own. So banking, financial services, health services, among others. And then, of course, I said tourism. And taking aviation, obviously that also talks to tourism to some extent, right? So linkages with transport, because once again, we as black people have always been, whether through taxis or buses or so on, we've always operated in those sectors. So for instance, one of the things that Tebe also had, again, very early on, was transport. We used to have our own bus company. It was called Windward Tours, which was also later disposed of.
So one of the, I suppose, traditional reasons why a business starts is because an entrepreneur sees a need in society, checks its viability as a business venture, and dives into that and spends time developing it and creates a business out of that space. A Tebe, for example, would have entered and invested in various businesses, not because of there's a need in the entrepreneurial startup sense, but because maybe there is a business opportunity there that gets presented by the fact that there is a particular environment nationally that lends itself to opportunities being taken. To what extent has that reality, in other words, the reality of seeing opportunities because an economy was beginning to be more accommodative of those that had been kept out of the economic activity of the country. To what extent was that motivation into getting into business versus the traditional entrepreneurial process of getting into business? To what extent was that a source of Tebe's success, or maybe not? I mean, you've already spoken of certain businesses that weren't viable, that didn't work out, and some did, some didn't work out. Talk to me about that space.
Yeah, no, I actually think it's both, by the way. Yeah? I actually think it's both. So at a national level, conditions were such that things were changing. And as political changes were happening, there's also a realization that there needs to be economic change. But you could not take advantage of the economic change if you did not have the entrepreneurial flair, right? And hence, in my view, what has made Tebe, even today, by the way, we always say we employ within Tebe people with an entrepreneurial flair, because opportunities may be there, but if you don't have that entrepreneurial spirit, you will fail to seize those opportunities that are there. right? So in the case of Tebe, it was both. You're absolutely right. The conditions were changing, but we had people, and we still have people with entrepreneurial mind that could see that here's an opportunity, I can do the following. I already said to you, we started, for instance, an airline business, right? Now, you could not start that if you don't have an entrepreneurial spirit or mind. Certainly, especially going for aviation, a very capital-heavy business. But we could see there's an opportunity here to do a regional airline. In fact, our founding chairman always talks about the first flight was to Kimberley, because the idea was by that time SAA was not flying to some of these regional hubs. So you could then go to those areas, fly there where SAA doesn't. Now, there's conditions in the country, sure, but there's an entrepreneurial mind that sees, here's an opportunity here, I can make business, I can make a success of this. Right? I'll give you another recent example. I'm saying recent, but we're talking 1997, right? So not far off from 1992, Kaya FM. Tebe was one of the founding shareholders of Kaya FM, together with the Wintate Humasik Airline, so on and so forth, right? Now, conditions were changing. The media landscape back then was dominated by white capital, as was the economy broadly. We realized there's an opportunity here to get into this space, because that's not only a space, by the way, that's very critical for information, but also important for education, for entertainment. And there wasn't a black voice. There wasn't a black voice, at least that could talk to the kind of things that we wanted to talk to. Yes, there were black radio stations, admittedly, within the SABC fold and so on, but there wasn't an independent one. And we went ahead and started, for instance, Kaya FM. A success story, I think, even though today, recently, Tebe has divested of that, but we stayed in that asset for many, many, many years. So I'm saying a combination of both the conditions out there, but you need somebody internally that can see the conditions, can see the opportunities, and seize the moment.
The reason why I asked that question in the way that I asked it is that black businesses that have emerged, and some have fallen, post-1994, who entered, and I believe correctly so, the commercial space on the idea that there is an opportunity presented by the BEE environment, have been accused of not functioning on the basis of first principles, fundamental business principles, and that they relied too much on the historical issue of the need for transformation, relied too much on political clout, but did not bring in the business expertise, what you call acumen, business acumen and the entrepreneurial flair. And so those businesses could not really hack it when it came to the realities of doing business in a business environment, such that many black economic empowerment luminaries have been said to have failed because they approached business with a political mindset. Comment on that.
Yeah, and I think it's so appropriate, my goodness, now that I think about it even more, that our founding MD used the term, Tebe is in the business of business. Tebe was not built for the short term. Tebe was built with a long-term objective in mind. And we knew that to get to where we want to get, which we are still not there, by the way, it's going to take time. It's going to take generations. So it was not for Mr. Mabuza to say, I have arrived, for Mr. Kanyile to say, I have arrived and that's it. Even Mr. Kanyile is no longer here. He's handed over the baton to us now. And we also at some point will leave, for age and other reasons, and will hand over the baton to others. Because the Tebe that we are trying to build is not the Tebe for Rapulani and the core team that is here as management. We are building a business here that's going to be sustainable beyond us. And I think that, unfortunately, is what, yes, certainly, some of our black-owned companies, right, that came, the opportunity was there, seized the opportunity, but perhaps did not have a long-term intention in mind. Because some of them, yes, today they made lots of money, especially for their shareholders or owners, but certainly many of them or some of them are no longer existing today. I think it's when you forget that if you want to build something sustainable, you've got to look in the long term, you've got to look beyond yourself today, but you've got to operate on the basis of what you call first principles. You are in the business of have your governance right, have your strategy right, have the right people.
Have the right culture.
Have the right culture, right? Put excellence in everything that you do. Have the right values. Tebe today operates on the core values that Tebe had even back then. What we call, I know sometimes this issue of core values, become a buzzword and so on. But I tell you, at Tebe we spend a lot of time firstly understanding what do we mean by these values that we have. Values like Botu, values like integrity, values like community and so on and so forth. We spend time on that, we internalize that. And that is what drives us. Our mission, building communities, we always say, very informed by our heritage, which we are very proud of, that heritage I spoke about extensively. Informed by that, we exist to build communities. You don't build communities in 5 years, in 10 years. It takes time. It takes time. You must have the stamina, but you will only do that if you are driven. You have very clear purpose, very clear strategy, the right people on board, adhering to the right values, right? And focus on what you need to do. Yes, in the short term, you'll pay dividends to shareholders, you will provide funding to communities and so on, but community building, for it to be sustainable, it's got to be long term. It's got to be long term. And so you've got to stay the course.
Talk to me about some of the business decisions that tested that very principle for Tebe. The history of Tebe speaks of successes and failures.
Yeah.
And that for me sounds like the authentic experience of any real business.
Yeah.
But as you say, that terms such as core values, mission statement, vision, all of those kinds of things that you hear spoken of in certain spaces become romantic buzzwords. And I'm looking to find out from your experience as Tebe, what were the times that tested that metal?
Yeah.
In terms of how do we at this moment invest or relinquish, divest from a particular investment based on business decisions that are undergirded by those non-negotiable core values. Give me an example of something of that nature.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because in, I think 2002, around there, these were the heydays of, I think they were called the A1 banks. The A1 banks are those banks below your traditional banks, the big 4 or 5 that we have. And there was a bit of economic turmoil, and Tebe was not spared. FBC, the bank, as I said, got into trouble, had a run on the bank, and the bank eventually was liquidated. Tebe's value, net asset value, was almost decimated, right? And Tebe had to rebuild. Tebe had to rebuild from that moment to what it is today. So you could almost talk Tebe of 2 phases. 1992 to about 2002 really got hit by a massive storm. A storm that not just Tebe, but hit the banking world, and Tebe suffered there. But because of resilience, because of a purpose that Tebe had, right? It was a decision taken. We are where we are, but we are going to dust off ourselves and we are going to keep going again. So that it is true indeed that it's not the number of times that you fall, but how many times you stand up. And that can only be if you are driven by a certain core purpose. Once again, that core purpose of building communities. Sure, we've been hit by a storm, but we've got this.
Explain to me the nature of that storm. Because what I'm looking for
it was a banking crisis at the time.
Yeah.
So FBC was not the only one. Companies like BOE, a bank that I worked for myself at the time, Gensec Bank, and a few others.
Boland Bank.
Boland Bank,
Right,
correct.
Yeah.
The so-called A1 banks.
Yeah.
A few of them.
Yeah.
You know, some of them got absorbed by the bigger banks. I think Boland went to Absa, if I'm not mistaken. There was that stable.
But what was happening technically? I mean, what was the crisis?
The crisis was that the banks were undercapitalized,
Ah.
and that there was therefore a risk. And the risk, the rating agents, as they always do, had actually produced a report on these banks. And that report was not well received by the market, and as a result, these banks suffered quite a lot. The Reserve Bank, I think, chose for whatever reason not to recapitalize these banks. And as I say, many of them were then absorbed into, I think BOE went to Nedbank, if I'm not mistaken. Boland, I think, went into the Absa stable, and so on and so forth. That was, but there was a serious business storm that hit the country and hit the sector, right? And Tebe was right at the center of that storm. But again, as I said, driven by this, a business decision was taken. We are not going to close. We are going to dust off here. We are going to rebuild. How do we rebuild?
Where was the funding coming from?
Well, that's exactly
the
right.
time?
Now, how we're going to rebuild? We're going to have to dispose of some of these assets because now you need capital. So you have quite a number of assets. You're going to dispose of some of them, take some money, and reinvest it in other assets that can then grow you. And that's what exactly we did.
One of the things you said earlier on was that there was a conscious decision to say that we are going to start our own businesses.
Yes.
So there was an entrepreneurial aspect to Tebe.
Yes.
But the mainstay, the core of Tebe's business is investment.
Yes.
Right? You invest in companies that are in existence.
Yes.
You help companies that are startups perhaps go to the next level. And that's slightly different from the entrepreneurial process, like I explained earlier on when we started. Where's your strength?
Yeah, so at Tebe actually we say we build sustainable value for our stakeholders through the creation of new businesses and the investment in existing business. So we do actually a bit of both. Even now today, we have a business that we started in the solar space when we realized that renewable energy was going to be a big thing, not only in South Africa, but in the world. We started a business that does rooftop solar. It's called Tebe Solar. So what I'm saying is that's not only the Tebe of yesteryears. Even the Tebe of today starts, in some instances, new business. But we also invest in existing businesses and we grow them. So our strength lies in, I think, first of all, our strength lies in the people that we have on board at Tebe. People who are not only shrewd business people, but they do have that entrepreneurial spirit, right? The core of it being the values that we all subscribe to, and really putting excellence in everything that we do. Those are some of the strengths I would say help keep Tebe where it is. Governance is one of those. At Tebe, our governance structures are such that sometimes other people would say they probably are even an impediment. But it's important for us to have the right board with the right women and men on that board, with the right committees, putting oversight on management, assisting management in the crafting of the strategy of the business. That's what the starting point really is. That there. Those are some of our strengths. Now, those things in the short term could be seen as impediments because they have costs and all of that, right? And it's admin and it's bureaucratic and so on and so forth. But when you have them at the core of what you do, they assist you when you have to take sometimes those difficult business decisions. Because there are times where we sit and say, what do we do? Right? Now, it's not just Rapulani waking up one day as a chief investment officer and decide we're going to do this. All of these things get through proper system, through proper structures, ventilated properly. Debates happen in this room, for instance, and outside. And eventually, we agree on something that all of us can say, okay, we may not get it right, but at least we eventually land on something that we think we've considered all the strengths and the weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
How big a role does BEE play in Tebe's investment strategy and investment consciousness? You hear sometimes people will say that some companies have graduated to a place where they no longer necessarily play or use the BEE card. as an opportunity opener.
Yeah.
To what extent does Tebe still use the BEE tool? Because I think it's an instrument, a legitimate instrument of doing business in a country with our history. But how much does BEE play in the way that you run your business as Tebe Investments?
No, we very proudly describe ourselves as a black-owned and black-managed company. We are very proud of that. And I think it's very important for us. We should never try to disown and discredit BEE. We are very proudly black-owned, black-managed company that developed, as I said earlier on, in the heydays before formal BEE. But BEE is important for us. And it is indeed a license to trade. But it's not our only value proposition at Tebe. So, of course, when we partner with the many partners that we have, whether local or international, of course, they look to us, first and foremost, for BEE credentials. So, of course, we bring the fact that we are black-owned from a B score point of view, assist in that regard. But I think our partners and even ourselves, when we engage with them, we go beyond the scorecard. The scorecard is there, and it is a tool, and we are very proud of that, you know. But we go beyond that scorecard, because what do? We say we are, of course, a black-owned company, but we bring more than our blackness. We will bring skills to your board. We will bring skills to your operations. We will be able to open opportunities. We will work with you to develop businesses. We will work with you to grow the company, and so on and so forth. So we bring business people, we bring business skills to whatever relationships that we have. And I think you can look across really almost all our partnerships. You will see that, yes, whilst the conversations may start, at least from their side, to say, I need a black-owned company because the industry I operate in requires that, it goes beyond that. For us, it goes beyond that. If we were to simply sit on the laurels of BEE, I think, quite frankly, personally, I don't think I would be here. And I don't think the Tebe of today would be here, because that can be. That's not to say BEE is not important. And that's not to say, by the way, BEE has achieved its purpose. It certainly hasn't as yet. We're not yet there, but you've got to go beyond just BEE.
There is a principle that was articulated by none other than Helen Ziller, for example, that I'm interested to hear your comment on. Yes, she's a politician, but black businesses and black professionals emerge out of a political context. She said something very interesting. She said there are black professionals and professional blacks. And it got me thinking. As I was thinking and conceptualizing the conversation around BEE specifically, that there is the moniker, the usual suspects, that has given the effort of affirming previously disadvantaged peoples a bad name. Because there have been people that have become professional blacks instead of being black professionals, which is what I think you were talking about, to say that we are proud of our blackness and what our blackness represents in a new business context that recognizes the systematic exclusion economically of black people, and that black economic empowerment is an instrument to bring us back into the mainstream of the economy. So I hear you. But what do you make of the idea of the usual suspects? And many black people have said that these usual suspects are the ones that have closed the door, as it were, to keep other black people out of opportunities, because they have the clout of the luminaries that you had, Kabatubatu. Because they've been in the commercial space longer than other businesses, such that, and I'm not saying that Tebe specifically, but such that companies that have been in black-owned, black-managed companies that have been in the commercial space for some time are then given the label, these are the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
So I think there's a number of things in what you've said that we can work with, right? But maybe let's start right at the end there. So, and I agree with you. Unfortunately, BEE has also been associated with some not so nice things, quite frankly.
Unethical.
Yes.
Yeah.
But by the way, that's not just unique to black companies.
Sure.
You must be very quick to
Sure.
say. And that doesn't mean we justify unethical behavior.
Sure.
But I just want to clarify that. Secondly, we also operate in a certain political context. And this term of usual suspects, I've heard it be used before and so on and so forth. I think we can have a debate about that. I think, certainly from a Tebe point of view, and if I maybe generalize also outside, I think if you want to change the economy, of this country, I think you've got to, it's important, as I said, Tebe exists for the building and transformation of communities. But you've got to build your core. You've got to build your core from which you expand. And by that, what do I mean? I'm not saying have the so-called usual suspects and leave out everybody else. But I would want to say, where are we today, 30 years later, where we can talk about 5, 6 core black companies that are up there, both in terms of size, success, and so on and so forth? Where are those? And what role are they playing in those companies, right? In the advancement, development of aspirant new entrants. I think even the B codes have this concept of new entrants. Sure, we must all, because we don't want to hoard everything for ourselves, and that's not our intention. But I really think that there is a need for building of what I would call core black-owned and managed businesses that can shine the light out there, play their role in bringing up others that are also aspiring to be where they are. I think that's the only way, in my view, at least maybe one of the, I think, fundamental ways that we can really transform fundamentally this economy. Where is the black-owned bank, for instance, that we can all be proud about? Say, yes, we've got depositors from, but this bank, by and large, is owned by black people. Where is that? We don't have, as far as I know. We don't have. Nothing wrong with that. So I don't like this idea of usual suspects when it's used in a demeaning manner, in a manner that almost suggests that these people are all there to hoard for themselves, or so-called to eat, to the exclusion of others. I think you have to say, what are these so-called core usual companies? What are they doing? Are they playing a role, or are they playing a prohibitive role in terms, are they advancing, or are they blocking others? For me, I think that's important.
To what extent does that term, the usual suspect, also suggest that the value that is being brought by the so-called usual suspect is no more than the fact that they're black?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, as I said, I think for us, certainly from Tebe, we trade beyond the fact that we are black-owned and black-managed. Our value proposition goes far beyond that. As I said, you've got to look at the skills, the expertise, the experience of the team that is here across the group, and you will see that for Tebe, it is more than just the skin color. We are business people in our own rights. We understand investments in our own right. We just happen to be black. We happen to be black-owned and black-managed. But we are business people. So we must be very clear about that. Are there others who are simply trading on the fact that they are black or they are black women? There might be. I can't speak for them, right? And I think if that's the case, I think it's unfortunate. Because I think if there are those out there, it is those kind of people that are actually bringing disrepute, in my view, to this whole concept of BEE. But BEE is important, given where we're coming from. I think people sometimes forget that. Let's not forget. We need to be delayed, and that's why I think the government was said, we need to be deliberate, we need to be intentional about it. BE is important. We come from a history where black people were systematically excluded from playing a meaningful role in the economy of this country. They were. You start with education. So lack of skills, certain things you could not go and do. You had to go and ask for permission from a minister of education or something like that to go and study certain courses, right? And even then when you were working, there were certain layers in the mining industry, for instance. You could not go beyond certain levels. So black people were excluded. You could not get into certain businesses because you could not also operate in certain areas of the country. You need licenses and so on. So let's not forget that. So BE, there's nothing wrong with BE. Hence I'm saying for Tebe, we are very clear that we are black owned, we are black managed, we are very proud of that, right? But we are fundamentally black business people in our own rights who have both the entrepreneurial wherewithal and the business acumen to look at the investment opportunities and to seize those moments.
There was a policy that was taken up that said that projects that go into certain communities must strive to give at least 30% of the projects, particularly building projects, to people that are in the communities of those where those projects are taking place. A noble idea that wants to include local communities in building projects. Very noble idea. What has happened, however, is that because it has not, the process, the policy has not been properly governed and managed and measured, is that process has spawned what we now call the construction mafia. These are criminal elements that take a noble idea and pervert it for their own nefarious purposes. BEE seems to have gone through a similar thing as a broader concept, as a broader affirmative action concept that says that we must recognize that in order to redress the deliberate process of excluding, systematically, legally, and structurally excluding people because of the color of their skin, maybe let me put it this is a question. Are there people who have misused that regime, that policy, that approach, in your opinion, in this BEE space?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt, right? And it's unfortunate. What you were referring to earlier on, for instance, local economic empowerment. Very important, a noble idea indeed, to say if you are going to be doing a project or investment in a local area, bring in the locals, either as suppliers or as workers even, or whatever, but get them involved. Perhaps even setting aside a portion of that. Absolutely. I think a great idea, right? But has it been hijacked by other people, quote unquote? Yes. What for me, though, I think is important that we don't do, right, is generalize, take those few rogue elements and generalize them for the concept or for black people. Sometimes you hear it sometimes, black people are corrupt.
This is a perpetuation of a very racist,
very wrong
stereotype.
Yeah, very wrong.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, you've got what, 40 or so million black people according to Stats SA? Right? You can't, because of a few rogue elements here and there. Yes, the crimes or the actions they do may be big and so on, but you can't take that and generalize it for the entire population. Also, by the way, almost suggesting that it is unique to black people, right? So for instance, BE was a project of the current government. It's not new, by the way. The Afrikaners used it.
Absolutely.
They just called it differently, right? In the US, they did, right? Across the world. Of course, the US is slightly different because there black people are in the minority, but in this country, black people are majority. But Afrikaners did that.
Sure.
In fact, formally in 1948, they did that.
Sure.
So
very intentional.
very intentional about it. And why? Because they wanted to address a specific need. At that stage, I think it was called the poor Afrikaner problem, which was a big issue. They did that. And what they did, they
The
built
poor white problem.
the poor white problem, exactly, but mainly Afrikaner, right? And they got them, they deployed them as artisans and so on and so forth in all manner of sectors of the economy. Were there rogue elements who abuse that system? I'm sure there are.
Sure.
I'm sure there are. So like any other thing in life and in society, you will have elements who will take on what really is, as you say, a noble idea, a noble concept, noble principle, and change it to suit their own selfish, individualistic needs, sometimes even criminal. That's unfortunate. That's a reality. But again, let's be clear, it's not unique to black people, and we should not ever take that and generalize it and then use that to say, no, BE is bad. There's nothing wrong with BE. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
You speak of the Afrikaners, you've spoken of the Jewish community, you've spoken of, and they seem to have created a core. The Afrikaner Bond, formerly known as the Broederbond.
Yes.
There is a principle within the Jewish community, I think it's called Fargin, where they will keep the rand within their community by giving opportunities to people of the Jewish community.
Yeah.
The Indian community has done
Yeah.
that. We as black people seem not to have coalesced in similar ways.
Yeah.
And that's the reason probably why we don't have that core that you were talking about earlier. Why haven't we done so?
Yeah, that's a heavy question, I must say, and even at a personal level now, not just at Tebe. It's a question that occupies me quite, because you see it in many sectors, by the way. And it seems not only to be a South African black problem, by the way.
Sure.
It seems to be a problem globally. I think there are many reasons for that. Those within the black consciousness movement will say it starts with the self. It starts with the respect and the love of self, and that as black people, we seem to suffer from what other people will say, well, remember a black child was subjected for so many years to messages about how inferior they are. And so when we look at ourselves, even if you may be educated, there's still this element of lack of self-respect. Now, I don't know, but I think there are elements of that. I think there are certainly elements of that, because you're right. I mean, look at the taxi industry, for instance. I don't know the numbers, but I know from where I come from traveling here to work to and fro, largely black people. But I don't think it's owned by black people in terms of real ownership. Who owns these taxis? Who owns the financing of these taxis? Who owns where these taxis get fixed? Where do they put their petrol or their fuel, whether diesel, whatever? You know, all of those. So if you look at the value chain of, and I'm just picking up that sector because the sector where I know growing up, for instance, even with those old Valiants and so on, but black people have always owned that industry. But I think if you were to do a proper analysis of the value chain, you're going to find that the real ownership of it by black people is very insignificant, if any, right? Now, that's not the only area. Look at the spaza shops, right? In townships. I mean, it's interesting these days. I hear some of these spaza shops are not owned by black people, by the way. I'm not just talking about foreigners now. I'm talking about black people. They're owned by other people. I hear there are restaurants in some of the townships, some of the very famous townships, which are actually not owned by black people, but they are still using black names, for instance, or the owners who were the owners.
Fronting.
Fronting, quite frankly, some of them get even that far. Exactly. So you can go to various sectors of the economy, and you're right, it's sad. I mean, I'm a lawyer by profession, for instance. And I know, for instance, from even some of my own black professionals, lawyers and so on, they struggle to get briefings. we don't seem to do well in one, trusting each other, or well, first of all, respecting yourself, right? And then two, saying, I'm looking at Aubrey, I know that he is skilled in this area and I can trust him to do as good a job as I would go if I were to go to a white person, Indian person, or whatever. We don't seem to have that. And I think, quite frankly, fundamentally, I think it's got to do with the mind. Unless we change that, it's got to do with the mind. And that starts at a very early age, because we've got to teach our kids. I know it's not necessarily a topic for today between you and I, but the issue of language, just that. Already you start taking away the respect for self. I know of many of us as black people where our kids can't even talk our mother tongue.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you pass through those values? There's certain idioms I can't say in English, even if I try, they lose the meaning.
Sure.
Right? Now, I'm saying, I think it starts there, and it goes all the way. By the time I grow up, I have lost so much respect of myself. And because I don't respect myself, I'm not going to respect you. I'm going to respect that other person.
Where do we find the manifestation of that principle, of that consciousness in Tebe?
So within Tebe, we are very deliberate. We are very deliberate. First of all, as I said, we are black owned and we are black
Because
managed.
I imagine that part of the success or failure of a business depends on the culture within the business.
Absolutely.
Depends on the core values that are espoused in that business.
Absolutely.
And part of the consciousness that you've just spoken of needs to be found in the way that we do business.
Yeah. Now, we're very
Talk
clear
to me
about
about that.
No, absolutely. I mean, as I said, first of all, black owned, black managed. But secondly, one of our core values is Ubuntu. And we are very clear about that. Actually, we actually refer to as Ubuntu, not even Ubuntu. Because, sometimes this term has become so popularized that it actually has lost its sense. So we chose deliberately not to use the Nguni language of it, but to use the Sesotho version of it, which is Ubuntu. Because fundamentally, Ubuntu describes we as Africans. Now, we, by the way, you're going to find in Tebe, we employ a whole range of people from all manner of background, race, color, gender. So we don't exclude people. But what you're going to find is at the core, right, and the majority certainly of the staff within Tebe are black, right? But as I say, that does not exclude.
Sure.
We are open, in fact, we are open to all manner of people, villagers and so on and so forth. But the people that we get are people that then subscribe to these values, these core values, the values that recognize that I am because you are, but what does an African do? So, for instance, also in the businesses we partner with, some of our own suppliers, we are very clear, we are very deliberate. We have a number of suppliers who are black professional firms, individuals, and so on and so forth. So we play our own little role in our ecosystem of ensuring that we move away from that principle I was talking about, where you say, but why are we as black people not so good in not only trading amongst ourselves, but also promoting ourselves? And that's why we are very clear about
Does that principle also appear in your investment strategy?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So when we look at our investments, we have a very clear investment filter. That investment filter has three elements largely. It looks at what is the cash the business can generate, because cash flow is key. We look at the growth that the business can give us, and then thirdly, we look at transformation. Now, transformation for us is beyond just that scorecard. As I said, Tebe has its own scorecard. We then say to ourselves, by investing in this business, where is this business now? What are the things that we need to do? Sure, it may not be where we need to be now, but we then put in place a plan that says we start today, 2024, by 2025, it must be here, 2026 must be here, 2027 must be there. That's a third element. All our investment decisions, investment criteria, has that. And every investment paper that comes in this boardroom has to address those three elements. So I say there are those key to financial, let's call them matrices, and there's this one, which looks at the social aspect of that business.
There's so much we could delve into,
Yeah.
but I want to thank you for the clarity that you've provided that has been led by a company such as Tebe investments in the murky waters of business and particularly investment. I want to thank you for the longevity that Tebe Investments has shown and in South Africa's unique commercial space.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you once again for agreeing to talk to us.
Yeah.
There's so much we could be talking about, but I think this is a good start. And I want to thank you for agreeing to talk to us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks very much. Indeed, there's a lot, and we've touched on so many topics, and some of them we didn't go right in deep, but I think, as you say, it's a start, and I certainly look forward to engaging more, perhaps even on some of this, and we can unpack them even further. I mean, this whole concept of social engineering, we touched on the social side, but you can see how even from the social side, these things can have an impact on business because of just how simply we're raised. And I was bringing to you to say, just from languages that we speak, how that even filters all the way to how we make our investment decisions. So anyway, but no, thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Rapulane Mabelane is the Chief Investment Officer at Tebe Investment, and we look forward to yet another conversation with some of our luminaries in the business world. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.